Well, good morning, everybody. I hope everybody has had as blessed of a week as I have. It's been a little bit crazy, had a lot going on, but had several blessings coming in this week. Bought a house and moved. It was the first day of school for my oldest, starting first grade this week, as well as had a couple of opportunities through work that cost some extra time, but hopefully will pay off in the long run here. But so that being said, please bear with me if I'm a little rough around the edges this morning. I'm rolling on maybe 21 hours of sleep for the week. So bear with me a little bit here. If I start yawning, I promise it's not because you guys are boring me. We will be continuing our study into the divided kingdom today. As Darrell mentioned on Wednesday night, this will be kind of a three-part series into the study of the reign of Hezekiah. He got started Wednesday night with part one. This will be kind of a part two in that series, and then that'll wrap up on Wednesday night as well. As you may have noticed, if you reference the schedule or if you look up there, we've got quite a bit of actual text to cover today, or at least it appears so. However, 1 Kings 18 and 19, and then Isaiah 36 and 37, and Chronicles 32 all cover the same thing almost word for word with each other. You can almost copy-paste the King's text and the Isaiah text over each other with some minor variations there. And then that second chapter in 2 Chronicles that we're going to cover today is like a summary of the events there as well. And so we have two kind of main sections of what we're going to cover today. We'll cover a little bit more of the reformations and things that Hezekiah put into place when he took over, continuing from what Darrell was speaking on Wednesday night. And then we'll have a good chunk of it here with the interaction with the Assyrians and King Sanakrib. All right, so we'll start off, we'll cover this, let me see here, is my clicker connected at all? I sure hope so. Things are not going to go over very well for me if we don't have our slides this morning. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, let me find it. Bear with me, guys. Like I said, it might roll a little bit rough this morning. We will start, if you want to turn, we'll begin our reading in the King's passages here, chapter 18. While we kind of work through this little hiccup here, we'll give everybody a chance to get over there. All right. So as we talked about Wednesday night, Hezekiah kind of takes over and makes a very drastic course correction, finds copies of the law, has to go and do some pretty major renovations to the point that they had to clean up the temple enough that they could even get the doors open. But so a lot of really good steps in the right direction there. And so kind of on the tail end of that is what we'll talk about this morning. So we'll talk about how he finishes kind of wiping out idol worship in the kingdom. One thing there from verses 4 kind of through 8 there of chapter 18. One thing we find here that's rather interesting is a part of this wiping out the idol worship and the false places of worship. One thing he has to destroy is the Bronze Serpent of Moses. So I'm sure most people remember this story. It's between the Exodus from Egypt, when the people are wandering on their way to Canaan. They go down and they're going to try and cross through Edom, but Edom doesn't really want them to cross through their land at the time. So then they have to turn around and wander back around again, and the people start to grumble we don't have any food, we don't have any water, we're getting tired of this bread that is all we've had to eat. And they start complaining, why did you even take us out of Egypt just to kill us while we're wandering around in the wilderness? And as a punishment for that, God sends the fiery serpents that start biting people, kills several Israelites until they see the error of their ways. And then they, in typical Israelite fashion, realize they've done something wrong, repent and come back to the Lord. And he has Moses create and put on a pole this bronze serpent that anybody that's bitten can look at the serpent and be saved. Well, they still had this through to the time of Hezekiah, and even had started to worship the serpent directly instead of remembering that it was a gift from God to save them from that. And so that's one of the things that Hezekiah has to destroy here. And so there's the passage in Numbers chapter 20, or then back to our text here. And that's 2 Chronicles chapter 31. We'll flip over verse 1. And so this is right after Hezekiah reinstitutes the Passover and reobserves that. He sends all of the people out from observing this Passover, and they tear down all of the remaining places of worship for the Asherah, the poles, all these false altars, and the various other high places throughout these tribes before they return home. And that'll be kind of an important thing to note going forward, is he didn't just tear down these altars and things to other gods, but also the other places that they were worshiping the Lord that they weren't supposed to, the Dan and Bethel and these places, and reinstituted, we're going to worship at the temple in Jerusalem like we're supposed to, and takes down all of these other places that they were not to be worshiping. Continuing the reformations that he makes is he goes back through, after he gets the temple and some things in place, as he redivides out the duties of the priests and the Levites back into their various tasks that were assigned to them. He reassigns priests to do the burnt offerings, to do the fellowship offerings, assigns some as ministers, some to give thanks and sing praises at the gates, and reinstitutes all of their various roles. With this, he donated from his own wealth to support all of the various offerings that were going on as they were coming back into things they hadn't done in a long time. Instead of just demanding that they have everything on their own, he pulls from his own pocket to support all of the things they were supposed to be doing. And then he calls on the people living in Jerusalem to give their portion due, or to pay their tithes. And this is specifically so that the priests could focus on being full-time priests. They could quit their day jobs and focus really on what they're supposed to do, which is a practice that we still do today. We support Lawrence so that he can spend full time invested in his studies here, studying with the members here, preparing lessons, and then also supporting the work in other places as well. And so Hezekiah kicks this back into effect in order to support the priests, and he receives an overwhelmingly positive response from the people of Jerusalem. Let me flip over to my Chronicles passage here, and I'll read it directly for you. But they begin to gather in the 3rd month, and they start to pile into heaps until the 7th month. So they get so much donated and delivered to support the priests, it takes them 4 months to pile it all up and get it sorted out, which makes Hezekiah very happy. They come through, they see the result of this, and he kind of asks, well, what's going on with all this stuff? And the priest said, well, we've got enough to eat and live on, and all of this is just extra. So he has them build up storerooms, and So he said, build out these storerooms and then go out to the surrounding towns. We've got Jerusalem covered with excess, so go out to the surrounding towns. And it goes through and it does a lot of genealogies, and it says, it gives a big list of names of the people he put in charge of tracking everybody down and assigning work and distribution of resources. But they go to the surrounding towns. They get through the genealogies of the Levites to make sure that they've got the proper people and the priests, the sons of Aaron, and they reassign them. They pull them from whatever work they were doing and reinstate them as priests and get them back on the right track, and are able to support all of that as well. Then we get a little bit more word on Hezekiah here, a lot of very high praise. He did what was good and right in the sight of the Lord, which over the course of our class has not been something said of very many people, but he did so with the wholeheartedly, and so he prospered. As I said, it's been a bit rare that we see where people have done the right thing that pleased the Lord, but each time we are specifically told, did what was right in the sight of the Lord, and so he prospered. One thing that is rather unique, and I know Darrell said it on Wednesday night, but I'll say it again, just because of how important of a statement I think it is in talking about Hezekiah, is he did all that was right in the sight of the Lord, was a man after God's own heart, as his father David was, which for anybody to be compared directly to David like that is very, very high praise. Most of the time, David is considered the gold standard for what you could be when it comes to being a man of God. And so even though Hezekiah here was very imperfect, ended up having to do a lot of the things not exactly to the law, but he did it in such a way that his whole heart was behind it. He did it for the right reasons, was doing the absolute best that he could, and because of that, he is said to be exactly like David there. And so now we'll get into kind of what the vast majority of our text is set to cover, is this interaction with King Sanakrib of Assyria. So he's king of Assyria, who is the current superpower of the area. Darrell showed a map on Wednesday that they pretty much control the entire Middle Eastern region there, all the way down to and covering parts of Egypt and Edom, Babylon, Syria. They kind of cover just about everything in the area here, including, the previous reign. The kings of Israel and Judah both would have been considered vassal kings to the Assyrians. They would have paid taxes and tithes to kind of be left alone by the Syrians. Well, we see here that Hoshea, the king of Israel, and Hezekiah have both stopped paying that tax, tried to break away and no longer be subservient to the Assyrians here. And because of that, the Assyrians, they come through, and over a 3-year campaign, starting in the 4th year of Hezekiah, they wipe out all of Israel. Looking here, back in the King's passage, starting in verse 9, and in King Hezekiah's 4th year, which was the 7th year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, marched against Samaria and laid siege to it. And in the end of 3 years, the Assyrians took it, so Samaria was captured in Hezekiah's 6th year, which was the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Israel. The king of Assyria deported Israel to Assyria and settled them in Hala, in Gozan, and on the harbor rivers and in the towns of the Medes. This happened because they had not obeyed the Lord their God, but had violated his covenant, all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded. They neither listened to the commands nor carried them out. So this is a big milestone, especially for our class here. We went from studying one kingdom to 2 kingdoms. Here we're kind of is the end of the Israelite kingdom. So where we've had this split nation, that northern kingdom is no more here. This is where they're kind of their final judgment. They get wiped out, taken and spread out, and never to really be brought back together and reformed. And so then we have here about 7 years later, in the 14th year of Hezekiah, they start their campaign against Judah. And so before we kind of move on here, just a little bit of a background about how the Assyrians did things. They were a very specific kind of overruling nation. As long as you behaved, followed your orders, paid your taxes, did what they told you to do, they generally would leave you alone. They were okay to expand their border, have you under their control, and let you, generally a regional power, maintain their seat. But if you caused any kind of trouble, they made very brutal examples out of people. They publicly would flay people alive, have people drawn and quartered or hoisted up while still alive on pikes and left in a town square as examples of, if you don't do what we say, this is what's going to happen. As they did with the Israelites, they would often deport the vast majority of the local population out to different areas of the kingdom, of the Assyrian kingdom, and then bring in other people to that area to repopulate. Does everybody know why a country would go through all the trouble of taking an entire population somewhere else to bring in another population to the same area? A lot of times they would do this because usually it doesn't make people too happy when you come in, wipe out their nation, wipe out their rulers. So they would spread out the people that they had just made really angry, send them to places where they don't know the language, they don't know the customs, they don't know the religions, where they're really out of place and can't have any kind of easy way to organize against the Assyrian government. And so then as a part of that, their land now empty is a place where they can reseed other people. It's a good way to keep control over large areas, especially when you're going through rather brutally and taking things from people. And it's because of Hezekiah refusing to pay that tax anymore that they make this march on Judah and start kind of treating Judah in this way. So then here we've got these three passages that are all nearly identical iterations of the same interaction between Sanakrib and Hezekiah. The Kings and Isaiah passages, as I said, they are pretty much copy-paste one over the other, of course, because Isaiah was there when this was happening. In the Kings passage, as we know, is much more just trying to be a factual, this is what happened. The Chronicles passage, which is much more of a written after the fact to the Jews, this is where we came from, this is our kingdom, has a bit of an abridged version of what happens here. We don't get all of the same dialogue in it. But we still get the same message. So 2 Kings 18, verse 9, all the way through the end of chapter 19. 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verses 1 through 23. A much shorter passage, as everything, like I said, is a bit summarized and we don't get all the direct dialogue. And then chapters 36 and 37 of Isaiah. So all three of these kind of have the same three events that happen. Assyria comes in and they take all of the fortified cities of Judah. It comes in and they just completely wipe everything out and end up with kind of two cities remaining. You have Jerusalem and a city called Lamech or Lamesh that doesn't survive, but is kind of they've got the vast majority of the Assyrian army is over here sieging this city. and then you have the dialogue that's going on at Jerusalem while that happens. So they take all of the cities. Hezekiah will make some effort to dissuade or stop the Assyrians from continuing all the way to Jerusalem. It doesn't work. And then you end up with a standoff at the walls of Jerusalem. Again, excuse me. So in Kings, we get a story here where Hezekiah kind of tries to buy off the Assyrian king. Everything has been taken from him. He's on his last leg. He's stuck in Jerusalem. And so he sends a letter to Sanakrib and says, hey, I made a mistake. I was wrong. I should have been paying my taxes. What do I have to pay you to get you to go away? And so Sanakrib gives him a bill, says, pay me, I think it's 300 talents of gold and 1,000 talents of silver, which Hezekiah, as we read in the book of Kings, pulls from the temple. He pulls all of the riches and wealth from the temple of Solomon to pay this bill as everything he's got left, which again, I think points to how Hezekiah is an imperfect man after God's own heart. He did a lot of things that I'm trying to do my best here, but doesn't necessarily do things the right way. And this is one example here of that. In the book of Chronicles, he sees how bad everything is going, and so when he realizes they're going to have to make their last stand at Jerusalem, he sends his generals and his captains out to block off any and all water sources outside and around Jerusalem, because an army that's laying siege that has no water doesn't tend to last very long. But again, that also doesn't work, as the majority of the army ends up staying at that city of Lamech, or Lamesh, depending on how you want to read that word. And so we have here that Sanakrib sends 3 people while he's sieging this other city to go to Jerusalem to kind of talk to and taunt the Israelites. He sends his tartan, which would have been like a chief officer or maybe a general of his army, a Rabsaris, which would have been another one of his chief officers, maybe second in command to that general, and then a Rabshakeh, or whoever would have been set to be the regional governor that was going to be put in place once the Israelites and the Judeans were taken out of place. So he sends these 3 people to Jerusalem to have a talk with Hezekiah, and Hezekiah sends his guys to the wall to talk to them. And we get this altercation here where the Assyrians are just boasting against Israel. And they kind of make 4 general points here that we see across the texts. They kind of ask, well, who do you think you are to stand against us? Why are you so confident that you can fight against us, that you're doing all of this here? They go as far as to the point that they say, we could give you 2,000 horses to mount a cavalry against us, and you wouldn't be able to field enough men to put on all the horses. They say, who do you think you're going to call for help? The Egyptians, who would have been an ally against the Assyrians at this time, he says, Egypt is too weak to help you. They're like a cracked weed that if you put your hand on to steady, it will crumble to dust in your hand. So you have no allies that can come and save you. Why would your God help you? Did not Hezekiah tear down all these places of worship down to only having a single place and tell everybody you can't worship anywhere but in the temple of Jerusalem? And they make the point of, how is your God different than any of the gods of the people from the nations that we've already conquered? He gives a list. Where are the kings and the gods of all of these other nations that we've marched through and just taken as if it was nothing? What makes your God special when all of these other places told us the same thing? Our gods will deliver us, and none of them did. And we get this little interaction here where Hezekiah's captains kind of are at the wall and they say, well, let's talk in Arabic stop shouting in Hebrew. We don't want everybody having all of your words. We don't want that kind of dissent being spread across the wall. And the Assyrians say, oh, you think that we came here just to get in your head? And then they shout louder in Hebrew to the men manning the walls, trying to get and undermine people's confidence. And so then, again, we have, in the response to that, Hezekiah goes into kind of this panic mode, where he acknowledges, when he hears these taunts, that they're right. We, standing on our own, have no chance of defeating the Assyrian army. He goes as far as to say that we don't have the strength to bear the children that are ready to be born, even. He recognizes that we're in a very bad spot, and so he sends his captains and his servants again, go find the prophet of the Lord, Isaiah. Rightly so, turns to the prophet of the Lord. Again, a testament to him being a good king, knowing what he's supposed to do here. And he kind of goes to Isaiah and he says, well, they're sending all of this blasphemy at the Lord. Maybe he heard it and will save us. And so then we get from Isaiah a promise of deliverance as a response from the Lord. He goes, this, do not be afraid, the Lord says. I will cause him to hear whispers, or he will receive a rumor, depending on the translation, that will make him want to leave. And when he goes back to Assyria, I will have him be killed by the sword. And so then that's exactly what we see happens. The text continues, and Sanakrib gets this message from some of his servants that come in from back in the mainland of Assyria and different parts of their borders, where they say the Cushites and the armies of Libnah are causing trouble and are fighting against the other and are fighting against you. And so Sanakrib has this incentive there, just as the Lord said, to try and wrap things up as quickly as possible and get out of Judah to go fight these other battles. And so what he does is he doubles down on his taunting and makes a direct threat. And he says to Hezekiah, or he says to his servants, go tell Hezekiah, the king of Judah, do not let the God of your people that you depend on deceive you, when he says, Jerusalem will not be given into the hands of the king of Assyria. Surely you have heard that the kings of Assyria have done to all the countries, destroying them completely. And will you be delivered? Did the gods of the nations that were destroyed by my predecessors deliver them? And so he doubles down again on this. Why is your God any different? We'll crush you just like we crushed all these other people that were relying on their gods. And then we move into, instead of just turning to Isaiah again, Hezekiah gives this prayer to the Lord. He says, Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Give ear, Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, Lord, and see. Listen to all the words of Sanakrib has sent to ridicule the living God. It is true, Lord, that the Assyrian kings have laid waste to all these peoples and their lands. They have thrown their gods into the fire and destroyed them, for they were not gods, but only wood and stone fashioned by human hands. Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, Lord, are the only God. That's a pretty powerful thing for Hezekiah to say, especially when he's in this position where he's trapped in his own city. He knows he has no chance on his own. And when he's being directly challenged in his faith of all these other people have called out to their gods and nothing has happened. For him to acknowledge and turn around and make this statement that let all the kingdoms know that you are the only God is a powerful statement for Hezekiah to make here in this prayer. And he gets, in my opinion, some of my favorite types of verse is the direct replies from God when he's talking about people that are threatening his people or have completely blasphemed him, and when he says, all right, I'm going to handle this now. And we get here in 2 Kings 19, 20 through 34, or Isaiah 37, 21 through 35. If you want to choose either one of those to turn to, they read exactly the same. This is God's reply, and we're going to read that here. We'll read through the entirety of that. I'm going to read out of Kings, but as I said, either one, they're direct quotes from each other, so whichever one you prefer to turn to. Then Isaiah the son of Amoz sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, your prayer to me about Sanakrib, king of Assyria, I have heard. This is the word of the Lord has spoken concerning him. She despises you. She scorns you, the virgin daughter of Zion. She wags her head behind you, the daughter of Jerusalem. Whom have you mocked and reviled? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes to the heights? Against the Holy One of Israel. By your messengers you have mocked the Lord, and you have said, With my many chariots I have gone up the heights of the mountains, to the far recesses of Lebanon. I felled its tall cedars, its choicest cypresses. I entered its farthest lodging place, its most fruitful forest. I dug wells and drank foreign waters, and I dried up with the sole of my foot all the streams of Egypt. So have you not heard that I determined it long ago? I planned from the days of old that now I bring to pass that you should turn forfeited cities into heaps of ruins, while their inhabitants, shorn of strength, are dismayed and confounded, and have become like plants of the field and like tender grass, like grass on the housetops, blighted before it's grown. But I know you're sitting down, and you're going out and coming in, and you're raging against me. Because you have raged against me, and your complacency has come into my ears, I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will turn you back on the way by which you came. And this shall be the sign for you. This year eat what grows of itself, and in the second year what springs of the same. Then in the third year sow and reap and plant vineyards and eat their fruit. And the surviving remnant of the house of Judah shall again take root downward and bear fruit upward. For out of Jerusalem shall go a remnant, and out of Mount Zion a band of survivors. The zeal of the Lord will do this. Therefore thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, He shall not come into this city or shoot an arrow there, or come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege mound against it. By the way that he came, by the same he shall return, and he shall not come into this city, declares the Lord. And here's one of my favorite verses from this passage. For I will defend this city to save it, for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. I've probably read that verse a dozen times over the course of this last week, and yet even still this morning, it gives me chills to just think that he's made the Lord so angry, and to be on the wrong side of that statement, or to be on the right side of that statement even, for the Lord to say, I will defend this city for my own sake and for the sake of my people. What more powerful a statement can he make than that? This is my place. These are my people, and you will do no harm here. There are very few things that have ever made me feel safer than to read something like this. And so that's exactly what happens. The Lord sends the next night. It says, the angel of the Lord goes out, kills 185,000 Assyrians. In Chronicles, it calls them the strongest and mightiest of the men in one night, so that in the morning they wake to great heaps of bodies and corpses. And Sanakrib leaves and returns to Assyria defeated. I don't think it'll be a problem for most of us, but I would highly recommend against going anywhere and saying, God's got nothing on me. Because he has a tendency to very dramatically and boldly prove you wrong. So the Assyrians retreat, head back to Nineveh, the capital city, where Sanakrib, while praying in one of his temples to his God, is killed by two of his own children, who then retreat and run away. Now, if I remember right, we finish at 10:30. Is that correct? I think so. So we don't have time. I had here, at the end here, I've got a little video that was included in the next slide, which is separate and aside from the text, that kind of goes into talking about the archaeological finds. We have several that have been uncovered from the Assyrian Empire, several records of King Sanakrib's where he talks about having caged Hezekiah like a bird in his city of Jerusalem. And then we have several depictions of the Assyrian assault on the city of Lamech, showing the people pushing the equivalent of siege weapons up against the gates of Lamech, breaking it down, shooting arrows into Lamech. And then they have uncovered the remains of that city. With the remains of that city of Lamech, you can see where they had siege mounds that would have been built leading up to the city as well there. But then also in Jerusalem, they have where there was what they believe to be a wall that was built as a panic fortification at the time of when Sanakrib would have been attacking, that kind of just leads right through the middle of some people's homes where they were, which definitely leads to, this was not a planned construction, but we got to do something right now, and so they just built around. And then there's also a cave that leads to the spring of Goshen, which would have been the primary water source of Jerusalem, that Hezekiah had built in preparation for this siege. That way they didn't have to leave the city of Jerusalem to get water, as they had already blocked off all of the other water around the city. Unfortunately, we won't have any time to watch this particular video. It's quite a few, it's about a 10-minute video that I was kind of sitting on in case I ran way out of time. But with just a minute or two here, we won't have time to watch it. But it goes into really good length talking about all of the things that we've uncovered that kind of prove this story. A lot of it is in Assyrian propaganda, so it doesn't really talk about Sanakrib having lost 185,000 people and returning home in defeat. It talks all about how we went down here and we ran off with all the Israelites and we sacked all the cities of Jerusalem, all of the cities of Judah, and we trapped Hezekiah in his city, and really paints the Assyrians as the victors in the tale, even though we know differently. But again, all of the stuff that we've uncovered is from the Assyrian records, and so it paints them as the victors there. As much as I would like to, there's the bell. And so perhaps another time, or perhaps on Wednesday, Dad would have a chance to go through all of that in a little bit better detail for you. Thank you very much. We'll see you on Wednesday.